Our oral history program is on the air once again. This is Ray Mofield speaking, and we're pleased to have as our guest today John Rayburn. Now, Mr. Rayburn is one of the more noted citizens of the county. I think all of you recognize his name. He served as county judge and city judge, and, well, we'll let him tell most of his story. As usual, we simply say that it's made possible by a grant from WCBL Radio and Shelby McCallum owner, and that the tapes will be stored in Frankfort and in the Marshall County Library, as well as the Pogue Oral History Library at Murray State. Mr. Rayburn, it's a pleasure that you've come to join us, and we'll ask you, if you don't object, to telling us how old you are.
I was 80 years old, 17th day of April. Born April 17th, 1923. No, 1903. 1903. I was married in 23.
Yes, sir. Well, that's very good. So that makes you certainly one of our senior citizens. We'd like to establish, for the benefit of those who are interested in genealogy, who your dad was.
My dad was H.H. Rayburn. Homer Houck was his name, but he always signed H.H. And he was county judge from 1930 to 34, I think it was, and then from 36 to, he served 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, back when we pulled the road graders with a little Fordson tractor.
Well.
And he gave me a job of running a grader on the roads, and I drawed $4 a day, and we'd have to drive in our own car wherever it was parked. If it was Calvert City or Wageboro or Aurora, well, we had to be there at a certain time.
But that seemed like a lot of money in a way, didn't it?
In a way it was, but you had to wait until the court met and you got a county claim, and then they couldn't get it cashed at the bank. You go out to Mr. Lum Hollis and discount it a dime a dollar, and he'd cash it for you.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it didn't amount to all that much after all. Now, would you tell us who your mother was?
My mother was, her father was named Charlie Anderson, and he lived and died about a mile south of Oak Grove Church. Mm-hmm. And he was crippled. He got crippled up in the Civil War, and he walked with a stick and had a pretty bad limp. My grandmother Anderson was dead before I was born.
Do you know what kind of a name Rayburn is? Is that English or Irish or Scotch? Or?
All I know, we've traced it down. My grandfather, or great-grandfather, I think it was, started from North Carolina to Texas or Oklahoma, somewhere in the west. And they crossed the river at Pine Bluff on the ferry. And my father and his brother liked it, and they stopped there. And then my grandfather moved on. I don't know where or what, but that's they came from North Carolina, my grandfather and his brother.
Now, you were born in Marshall County.
Yes, right in on the county line. I was born at, you'll know what it was, the Frank Swift old store place. You go 80 and turn like you're going to Kirksey about a quarter of a mile, and you turn left. Frank Swift had a country store there, and my daddy had a blacksmith shop next to it. And when I was a year old then, he built a shop at Brewer's, and there was only 2 houses there at that time. Later on, Jimmy Chester's store was down where Cratus Crest lived, down on the river sort of, and he moved up there. And then pretty soon Dr. Bean got out of college and he built his office there. And when we moved there was only 1 house, and it was 300 or 400 yards back up. There was the Grubbs, and they was up towards Hardin from there.
Your dad had a farm and a blacksmith shop?
No, he did not have a farm.
He did not have
a blacksmith shop. Built wagons and plows in the wintertime, and shod horses and rubbered buggies and stuff like that in the summertime. But then I remember the first automobile I ever did see. Me and my sisters going to school, Phipps School. He had bought a farm known as the Jesse Smith place. And we was going to school and heard the blamest racket I ever heard, and we run out across the road and laid down in the bushes next to the fence, and it was an automobile, we found out later, and Charlie Cole was driving it. It was a one-seated car and the top down, and the dust was going sky high when he passed. That's the first automobile I ever did see.
That created plenty of excitement.
Plenty of excitement. Then when we moved to Brewers, he sold a blacksmith shop to Copeland blacksmith, the father of Taz and them. I can't think of his given name. And
well, since he had a blacksmith shop, how many children were there in the family?
In the family at that time, let's see, it was Nora, Willitish's wife, and me, and Bessie is 3, and Joe was 5, and Charlie was 6, and Louise 7 children.
So
there was 9 of us, but 2 of them died when they was about a year old.
Now, I suppose you started to work at a rather young age?
Yes, when I was 12 years old, I could turn my shoes in the forge and shoe a horse. My daddy let me shoe one a week, and we got $1 for shoeing a horse with new shoes, and he would give me the $1, and I had more money than most of the boys around.
Yes.
You could buy a Coca-Cola for a nickel, and you could buy a great big cheese sandwich for a nickel, and so you go to show for 20 cents.
Yeah.
So, but at the time then I was, I'd say 14 or 15 years old. He said, "Come on, John, let's get at these men in a hurry."
Yeah.
One time, I shod 27 horses. He fit the shoes. It was a tater day, but I nailed the shoes on 27 horses.
27? Well, that's enough to kill a fella. Yeah. Hard work shoeing a horse, isn't it?
Yeah, but when I started, I had a habit. I started on the left front foot. I never would straighten up until I got around the other one. When I got that one done, while I was bent over, I got the hind one and the other one. And when we moved to Benton, we moved out of Cole's addition. And very few houses from there to town, no sidewalks or anything. And going from the courthouse to the depot, then everybody would go to the depot on Sunday and when they wasn't working and see the train come. But when you passed the Baptist church there was only 2 houses from there on to the railroad track. Charlie Lyle's mail carrier lived about a block down below the church. Is the house still there? And then a colored fellow, a horseshoer boy, Ford, lived way down close to the railroad. And that's on the houses on the left side.
Where did you go to school, Mr. Rayburn?
I went to school. My first school was at Phipps. No, it wasn't. It was Hale Spring. Went 1 year. Then we moved up to Brewers again, and I went to Phipps School. And Amherst Thompson's wife was my teacher. But you know her, I believe her. But anyhow, she was my teacher. And then we lived there 2 or 3 years, and then moved to Benton, and I went to school at Benton.
Finished up there.
Yeah.
All right, now we've gotten you up to shoeing horses, and you're about 16 years old, and so on. When did you get married?
I got married the 6th day of May of 1923. We celebrated our 60th anniversary the 23rd day of May.
Well, congratulations on that.
I had 3 children. They're still living.
Would you name those for us?
John Hale is the oldest one. He's 30 years old. And Jimmy is the second one. No, John Hale is 39 years old, and Jimmy is 37. And then Sue Cope is the girl, and she's 32 or 3. And my wife was Ganny Fawn. Her daddy was named Lamp Fawn, and they lived out on Tennessee River, the other side of Fair Dealing.
All right. Now, you had a farm on kind of the road to Olive, I call it. I don't know what the name of that road is, but...
Yes, I had a farm there, and I sold it when was elected, when I got out of the judge's office, I went to Evansville, Indiana, and worked for a guy that was buying property and stuff. Stayed there years. And I had bought that farm after I got out of the judge's office and built a house on it then when I got back from Evansville. And I had 175 acres there, and I sold it to Bill Futrell when the TVA run them out over on the river. I have another farm then on the lake, go through Fair Dealing and past Maple Spring Church and turn to the left. And I've got a farm in there.
All right, you mentioned moving to Benton. Were you old enough to remember when the courthouse burned?
Yes, sir. We moved there in January the 1st of 1914. I'm sure I'm right on that. And the courthouse burned about the last of February or the 1st of March. And next morning out in front of our house, we moved the house where you turn to go to City Dump or the golf course.
Yes, sir.
And that's a mile or more from the courthouse. But there was burnt papers all over the yard and the field and so on. The wind was strong from the east. And I went downtown and there was a raking around in there trying to find a body, and they didn't find it. And come to find out that it was set and the man left later.
All right, so we got what was called the new courthouse, and that is the basis of today's courthouse.
That's right. It's been added on. It was nice when they first built it. The old one, the jail was down where the phone company is at now, down below Philip Chevrolet. They had a little jail down there. And when they built the other courthouse, they built the jail. And of course, it's been rebuilt several times. And there's not any, wasn't a blacktop road in the county. People going to Florida from the north would come through Benton and get lost. And a gravel road going out to Agnes Ferry. And then Will Williams had a ferry there. You had to cross on a ferry. And
someone told me once, Mr. Rayburn, that there was a time when the men, I don't know whether they helped pay their taxes or what they did, but it was the law that they had to work on the road some. Do you remember anything about that?
I remember that very well. Back in the Depression in the 30s, my daddy was out of it then, and I owned the shop. And the state would give a man $1 a day to use a shovel loading gravel, and if you had a team and a wagon, they'd give you $1.50 a day. And they was going to pay you that in time for you to pay your taxes. I remember very well. They all needed work done on their horses, needed shoeing, and the wagons needed fixing. They didn't have the money. I went to Paducah, the Paducah Iron Company, and old man Vic Speck said he'd let me have the material, all of it, and I'd pay him when they got paid. And I remember very well, I'll never forget it, they're supposed to get paid in about January, February. But on Christmas morning, I started to leave. We had 2 children in, John Hale and Jim. I got to the door, and my wife, Gainey, said, "John, this is Christmas." And I said, "By golly, it is." She said, "The children's expecting something." I said, "Well, how much is needed?" She said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, can you get by on $10? And she said she could. So all the way to the shop, I was trying to think of somebody that could loan me $10. I knew my daddy couldn't. And I unlocked the door and stand there, of course, the blues. And Squire Cox lived out just a mile the other side of Branchburg. And I saw him come walking down the hill toward the shop. Well, I'd overhauled his wagon and his son-in-law's wagon. And I thought, "Oh, my God, Squire, you're a good man, but Lord, I wish you could pay me today." He come walking up and talked to me a little bit. He said, "John, how much did me and my son-in-law owe you?" I could have told him at a snap of a finger, but I didn't. I went in the office, big shot, and got my book, you know. And he said, "We got a little surprise. Said the state paid us yesterday." And so after a little bit, another one or two come down, and the wife come to get the $10, and I gave her a $20 bill. I said, let's just have a big one. And that night I had $500 or $600 in my pocket. They come in and paid me.
Well, isn't
That's
that?
how hard times are.
But that was really something.
Pay you $1 a day to shovel gravel, or $1.50 for you and your wagon.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up a bit. You're the first person I've ever been able to talk to that really knew the details of it like that.
We could go on till noon, I guess. And something had happened yesterday, I can't remember it, but something had happened back then just as clear as it ever was. I know I met a man last week up close to my age, and he grabbed me and squeezed me and talking about how happy he was to see me. And I was ashamed to ask him his name. I'd give a $10 bill if I knew who it was.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to admit that you've simply forgotten. Well,
something had happened yesterday. Something had happened back there.
When you came to Benton, none of the streets were paved, were they?
No, in the county either. And in my term of office, was the first blacktop on the country county roads that had ever been.
Speaking of that, when did you were you first elected judge?
In 1962, and I got out in '66.
And you were responsible for a good bit of the paving in those days.
We got that blacktop in the country roads, county roads set up. I flew to Frankfurt 3, 4, 5 times, and I got it set up, and so we started the main off roads, and now they're about all blacktops. I got several enemies because a road out here, and there'd be one over a mile or two that was more people lived on and more traveling, and to go and blacktop that one and leave this one, and I took them as far. I thought the magistrates had something to do with that too. The magistrate in his district, but we worked good together. We sat down and talk about it. And
well, you couldn't pave them all the same day.
That's right, or the same year. We had so many $1,000 a year, you see. But now they're practically all blacktops, Yeah.
Well, that's the result, of course, of a long series of workings which you were fortunate enough to be in on at the beginning.
When the TVA moved in at Gilbertsville, I was a third man in Marshall County hired. I was hired as a blacksmith welder, and I drawed $1.62.5 an hour. And they said down the shop, these people around out in the country, and they come down and they'd hitch their horses down there, and they'd sit around the shop on nail kegs. They'd say, did you know that John Rayburn went to work at Gilbertsville yesterday? $10 a day? Making $10 a day.
Yeah.
I stayed with them 10 years. Went up the river, moving the bridges and the railroads and things like that. I was the only welder they had that would go out of a night. I worked the afternoon shift, would work 2 o'clock. And then we got home and go to bed if some of the equipment through the summer worked around the clock, If they broke something, they'd come in my room, knock, and I got up and took my welder out there and fixed it for them.
Yeah.
But I drove time and a half for that when it was called out.
And that really sounded big then, didn't it?
Really something. I paid what I owed and paid me a home and got started. Then I went to North Carolina and stayed a year in a tunnel doing sharpening the tools and doing the welding.
Was that for TVA also?
That was for TVA, and I'd get to come home, try to come home once a month. A few times I didn't make it. You'd go through Nashville, Knoxville, and on down. I worked in Tennessee, I boarded in Georgia, and I drew my check out of North Carolina. Right in the corner of it.
Well, those are very interesting stories. Now, You've told us about the roads and what they were like and the part you played in getting them paved and so on. What do you remember anything about how high taxes were? People have always thought taxes were high, but by our standards now, I guess they were pretty low then
I think about a third then
of what they are now.
Or maybe even a little less. I don't know, it wasn't much. But you take a man that made a crop and he sell his corn. Man drove a wagon load of corn up, and he's still living. He's a barber. His name is Knowles, and he's got a barber shop right below Dreyfusville. Drove up in front of my shop one day with a wagon load of corn, and he asked me where he could sell it. I said, well, you can't sell that corn. I can't think of his given name. I called him his given name. But he talked on a little bit. I said, I'll give 15 cents a bushel for it. I had a milk cow and would grow my own meats, you know. Mm-hmm. About 3 o'clock that evening, he come down and he said, well, you want that dang corn thrown? And I give him, he went on the road and brought him $2.85. And I was going through some papers a month or two ago, hunting something back then, and I found that check where I paid him $2.85 for that load of corn.
A load of corn, only $2.85.
15 cents a bushel.
Boy.
I see 15 cents, 10 bushels, $1.50. 20 bushels for $3. He had nearly 20 bushels.
Yeah,
that was about wagon road then, you know. Narrow gauge wagon.
My dad used to talk about barrels of corn. Did you ever hear of a barrel of corn?
Oh, I was raised in a barrel. I've been with my daddy. I remember one time it was right the other side of John Ed Barnes' grocery, and there was a field of corn there. And he was looking at it, and it was pretty. And he said, I'll bet you that field of corn will make 10 barrels to the acre.
That'd been 50 bushels.
That'd been 50 bushels.
That's a lot of corn then.
That's something.
It was open pollinated and unfertilized, probably.
Hickory cane, I guess, and planted 30, the row was 36 inches, and then the corn planted 24, 30 inches apart. Mm-hmm. And you barred it off with a 1-horse turning plow or with a 2-row cultivator. You few of them that had some money got them a cultivator. And then you took a double shovel and split the middles. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then you gathered it with one man take a down row and a man on each side take 2 rows.
That used to be my job, the down row. And it was about as hard taking one down row as it was the 2 standing rows.
That's right. I've seen a big change. You didn't have steaks and sausage and so on. Everybody killed their hogs. And somebody come, I have a good many times, somebody come, I'd get up early and take my shotgun and get out and shoot the head off a frying pan-sized rooster, and we'd have chicken for breakfast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you had chicken, well, you didn't have it ordinarily for breakfast. Or had beef. Once a year, a man come by in a hack or a buggy peddling beef. My daddy'd buy a great big chunk. He'd slice some off and fry it for steaks, and then we'd have a beef roast, you know. Mm-hmm. And then we wouldn't have any more the next fall. I've seen a big change. Yes. We had plenty to eat. He'd bed a great bed of potatoes, and another one of cabbage, and another one of turnips. And then you'd pick a big bag, tow sack full of shell tobacco patch beans. You had beans, or you had cabbage, or you had turnips, or you had potatoes. You didn't have both or 3 of them.
Your mother would can a lot of stuff.
That's right.
Didn't have freezers then, of course.
No freezers at all. If meat happened to spoil, I remember having that happen a time or two. Then you didn't have any meat.
Could you tell us something about the business places around Benton when you, over the years?
Well,
when you came here in along about 1914, what was the town like then?
Well, there just wasn't any much. Going out toward the Murray, after you go down a block or 2, was just a house now and then.
Were there electric lights then?
No. I remember when they had a thing up at the schoolhouse meeting, a lot of them didn't want the electric lights. It cost too much. And they had a thing up there pushing for it. And we had a fellow here, Bus Creason. And let's see, she was the Jones girl. She married Scotty. She's over in the rest home now. She sang a song up at that gathering up at the courthouse about getting electric lights to Benton so Bus Creason could see his mustache. He had a mustache, and so they did get him. And I think when they got here, what I remember, it's $1.50 a month
Was the rate?
Then if you used
minimum.
too much, it went over
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
But since most people just had lights then, it probably didn't go over very often.
And there was a few sidewalks. There were sidewalks around the court square, and a few around. And they didn't have washed gravel like they have now.
No running water, I suppose.
No running water. We had men and some men in Benton, John. Let me see. One of them was a brewer that would haul gravel, and L. Ford had a big pair of white horses, and John Bearden lived right out across the creek over here, and they'd haul gravel out of this town creek.
Mm-hmm.
And the wagon hold a yard, and they'd charge you $1 for a yard of gravel, creek gravel.
Yeah.
And then you had concrete mixers. You mix your own gravel for it.
Let's see, was there there was a Heath store along there.
Morgan and Heath. When we moved here, it was Peterson's, old man John Peterson, and Charlie Morgan and Headley Heath owned a share of it and worked there. Then they moved out from him and moved across the street. There's some kind of a store there now. But Mr. Peterson then hired Bobby Vaughn and Fred Philbeck to work in the store for him. Then there wasn't a funeral home here. Old man John Kinney, right beyond National Store, had a place that he made coffins, made them out of walnut. And then there's a place there that they had them along about where Morgan and Guns at now, an old big metal building there, and they had coffins in there. Mm-hmm. And somebody died, and well, the neighbors could come to Benton in a wagon, and they'd load the coffin in the wagon. And I know the community would meet and dig the grave and neighbors. And when I was in the blacksmith shop, I run an ad one time on Tater Day that I would sharpen the picks for any graveyard or all of them in the county free of charge. And man, they brought me a wagon load. And I ground pop once that day for $0.10 a point. Mm-hmm. And then they'd have them ground as long as they could because new one cost $1, you know.
Yeah. So you had to make things last as long as possible because you simply didn't have the money to do otherwise.
That's right. You didn't have the money. And I always tried to make a rule all my life. If you couldn't pay for it, don't get it. But back then, you couldn't maybe at the time, but I'd pay for it before the time run out. I never did. Ever was turned down on anything, or for it, I know I never had a check to bounce on me. I kept up with it. You had to.
You remember, you mentioned the Baptist church once. Were there? I guess there were other churches in Benton.
That was the Baptist church, and then the Methodist church built way long later. I don't know where they met before that. And then there was a Christian church up here. They tore it down right up 3 blocks off the courthouse. And let's see. Boy, I remember that at all back when we first came here. My daddy belonged in New Bethel, but Dr. Thomas's, and we'd go out there when we went to church.
Well, that's very good. You know, we've almost reached the end of our program. We got another minute or so, and I wondered if you had anything special you'd like to get on before we have to sign off.
No, I don't. I'm proud that I live here, and I've spent those years here about as many as most anybody has that I've spent here.
You just as
And
soon have been in Marshall County as any place?
I'd rather have been. I've worked away from home a lot. I had to make a living, but I was glad to get back to Benton, Marshall County.
Yes, sir. Well, we thank you, Judge Rayburn.
Well,
You were city judge also for a while, weren't
yes, I was city judge. Oh, and Judge Hallam got sick and had to quit, and I was city judge until they passed the law that they don't have a city
you?
judge.
They don't have a
county
city
judge.
judge anymore.
When I was county judge, see, I had trials, and a man killed somebody or drunk driving or anything, they'd bring him to me, and if it was over a certain thing,
It went to circuit
I'd
court.
transfer him to circuit court. If it wasn't,
Otherwise, you
I'd
settled it.
try him myself. I'd get a jury
Yes, sir.
and try him in county court. But it couldn't exceed so much. It had to be a small fine, driving drunk, or a little fight, or something. But if it's anything much, it went straight to court.
Well, thanks again to Judge John Rayburn, and we conclude our broadcast for today. This is Ray Mofield speaking.